Hello, I'm Irma Esparza Diggs, Senior Executive and Director of Federal Advocacy for the National League of Cities. The pandemic dealt a shockwave through all of our communities, from the smallest towns to our largest cities. And we know that the impact and repercussions of this pandemic are far from over. NLC launched a year-long advocacy campaign that resulted in $65.1 billion of direct aid to every city, town, and village in our nation. Let me say that again, every single city, town, and village. That is a historic first, ensuring that every municipality will receive money through the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. As your community rebuilds and recovers from the pandemic, know that NLC is ready to help you every single step of the way. To get you the skills, best practices, and connections through our national networks that you can take back to your community, your residents, to ensure that your hometowns thrive. Today, we will discuss an overview of the American Rescue Plan Act and the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, or SLFRF. If you have further questions, please visit our website, nlc.org/recovery. There you will find numerous resources that we have created to assist you with questions on ARPA implementation, including blogs, fact sheets, webinars, trackers, and summaries. Or simply feel free to reach out to our team at advocacy@nlc.org. So let's start with an overview of the American Rescue Plan, also known as ARPA. The American Rescue Plan is a COVID-19 recovery package signed into law by President Biden on March 11, 2021. It contains $1.9 trillion of programming to stimulate the economy and help the country recover from this public health crisis. Within ARPA, the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, also known as SLFRF, was established to provide $350 billion for states, municipalities, counties, tribes, and territorial governments. This includes $130.2 billion for local governments that's split evenly between both municipalities and counties. So that means that every city, town, and village is entitled to a grant from the $65.1 billion pot, which is allocated to municipalities. These grants are not competitive. Your city is entitled to one. You do not have to apply in the typical sense, but you will have to request these funds from either the Treasury Department or your state, depending on your classification as a metropolitan city or a non-entitlement unit of local government. So that request is not to prove need, it is just to get your information for disbursement. However, these grants are not free money. They include requirements and responsibilities for use, guidelines you should familiarize yourself with as you develop plans and spend the funds. So in today's webinar, I will give you an overview of what these requirements are and the responsibilities. But know that you can always find more information at our website, nlc.org, or through Treasury's own website, treasury.government.gov/SLFRP. NLC has also developed a summary of other notable provisions in the American Rescue Plan Act relevant to municipalities and local leaders, which can be found at nlc.org/recovery. State and local fiscal recovery fund grants are administered by the U.S. Department of Treasury, which determines grant amounts and program rules. Each local government is a recipient of funds. So for non-entitlement units of government, mostly cities with population less than 50,000, Funds are allocated to your states, who will then distribute to the cities within that respective state. Treasury oversees this pass-through grant process. In May, the United States Department of Treasury released guidance for the state and local fiscal recovery fund, including information about how to receive the funds, the allocation, eligible uses, and reporting requirements. Additional guidance for non-entitlement units of government, or NEUs, has also been released. Be sure to review the resources available on Treasury's website at treasury.gov/coronavirus, where you will be able to find more detailed information on how your community can navigate this funding. So, what's the timeline for using these funds? Cities are not required to spend these funds right away. Funds must be obligated by December 31st, 2024, and spent by December 31st, 2026. Cities are also not required to make a grant expenditure before this first reporting deadline. You can just put in your information, but you don't have to spend money before that first reporting deadline. You can address emergency needs as soon as possible, but recipients have time to formulate a long-term plan with robust community input and stakeholder engagement for the remaining funds. You have time to review the guidance for eligible uses and funding uses that are most important to your community. While every city, town, and village will have a different timeline and needs, the National League of Cities has designed a few benchmarks that cities of all sizes can use to stay on track. Cities first must assess your needs, and this data can come from a variety of places, but we recommend reaching out directly to stakeholders in your community. We recommend reaching out to relevant nonprofit organizations, businesses, associations, and regional neighbors, as they can bring innovative or collaborative solutions to light. While you're assessing the needs of your community, also review Treasury's guidance on the SLFRF and consult NLC's various ARPA resources. This will ensure that any project your community pursues stays within the bounds of Treasury's rules and regulations. All of this preparation work will allow your community to propose a comprehensive recovery plan that contains a number of projects that's specific and works for your community. Community members and stakeholders should be kept updated on new plans and available resources. We also highly recommend sharing your project with your congressional delegation. Show them how these funds are being used, how they are making an impact, a difference in your community for your residents, your local businesses. And while carrying out a project, keep extensive documentation on file for all of your expenditures and routinely measure how well your projects are achieving their anticipated goals. This is important to not only comply with Treasury's regulations, but also because it will help you as community leaders pivot and adjust the program to maximize the effectiveness over time and give you the flexibility you need to meet the challenges that the pandemic is continuing to add on your community. So, what does your community need to do to receive these funds? Well, that depends on if you are a metropolitan city or a non-entitlement unit of local government. In order to access funds, metropolitan cities will need to request their funds directly through the Treasury online portal. And for purposes of these funds, metropolitan cities are those that have a population over 50,000 and those that receive community development block grant funds because they are their region's largest metro. These grants are non-competitive, which means cities don't need to know how they intend to spend the funds when they apply for them. Non-entitlement units of government, which consists of all local governments not considered metropolitan cities, have to request their local fiscal recovery funds through their state. And while each state will roll out this funding in their own way, there is some additional guidance for NEUs on the Treasury website. And when your state releases your amount, your state will also release the information you need to know to ensure you are compliant with Treasury's rules. The purpose or goal of each project should be oriented towards an expenditure category provided for Treasury's compliance and reporting guidelines. If a project does not explicitly appear in the rules, it may still be eligible, and Treasury has created a framework for municipalities to determine which hypothetical uses are eligible. Regardless of the project type, municipalities must use the following framework to assess the eligibility. The first is to identify the harmful effect of COVID-19 that the activity will address. Second, assess the causal or compounding connection with COVID-19. Third, assess how this effect disproportionately impacts distressed sectors or populations within your community. And last, determine how to prove the expense produces an outcome that addresses the effect. As the Treasury issues guidance and clarification, NLC will continue to share the comments and viewpoints of all cities, towns, and villages. And as new guidance is issued, we will see improvements, things that will make it clear to you on how you can spend the money. We were pleased to see many of our recommendations already adopted in the interim final rule. And Treasury really did a good job of extending flexibility to local governments while remaining within the confines of the law. However, many local governments may still be left wondering, what are eligible and ineligible uses of these funds? Well, first, you can visit NLC's COVID-19 Local Action Tracker, which is available at nlc.org. There, you can see how other cities are using local recovery funds and find examples of projects. And you can review the compliance and reporting resources available on Treasury's website to ensure you are following the rules. Check out those frequently asked questions that both Treasury and NLC have. Today, I will briefly review a non-exclusive list of eligible expenditures, but know that more details are available to you on Treasury's website. There are 7 summary level expenditure categories in which spending is eligible. And these 7 categories break down into more than 66 expenditure categories that your projects will fall under. In many instances, Treasury presumes the eligibility of a project when it is within a qualified census tract or QCT, meaning these projects are less scrutinized because these tracts already demonstrate need. These allowable uses are eligible outside of qualified census tracts, but you will have to provide additional documentation to demonstrate that they are eligible uses. The rule also outlines encouraged expenditures, which are not explicit in the legislation, but Treasury has provided evidence that these expenses would be good uses of the funds. That's where those FAQs come into play. These align with addressing underlying racial disparities, inequalities, and disproportionate harm. Now, let's go over some examples of these eligible uses, broken down into those 7 broad categories of use referenced earlier. Within each of the expenditure categories, the rule provides extensive lists of eligible uses and projects. To start, recipients may use funds to respond to the public health emergency with respect to COVID-19. And examples of eligible projects include covering the cost of public COVID-19 vaccination sites, purchasing personal protective equipment or PPE for use in congregate settings. You can also cover payroll and benefit expenses for public health and safety employees. The rule makes behavioral health care, including addiction treatment, eligible, which is justified by the behavior and mental health impacts of COVID-19. Recipients may also use funds to respond to the negative economic impacts directly resulting from the pandemic, which includes providing assistance to households, small businesses, and nonprofits, or aid to impacted industries such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. Examples of eligible projects include universal basic income programs, which many communities are trying out, local loan programs to small businesses and nonprofit organizations, and the rehiring of public sector staff that has been laid off or furloughed during the pandemic. In the interim final rule, Treasury continuously encourages recipients to use these funds to address disproportionate impact on people facing pre-existing disparities. They support these allowable uses by highlighting hardships facing low-income communities and communities of color that have higher unemployment and mortality rates during the COVID-19 pandemic. Recipients may use funds to provide a wider range of government services to communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the public health emergency. And examples of eligible projects include provision of services to address homelessness, such as supportive housing programs. Also, investing in pre-K, Head Start, or other educational programs in high poverty districts, and expanding local child care and social services for recipients of child welfare involved families. Another eligible use is that municipalities can use these funds to provide premium pay up to $13 per hour above regular wages for certain eligible workers performing essential work. Municipalities can transfer these funds to third-party employers with eligible workers performing essential work. The essential work involves regular in-person interactions or physical handling of items that were also handled by others. So all of those people who came to work in person every day during the pandemic, that is who we're talking about here. Treasury puts these uses into two expenditure categories, one for public sector employees and another for private sector employees. Lost revenue, that's also another eligible use for the coronavirus state and local recovery funds. This expenditure category focuses on replacing general revenue loss due to the pandemic. And in order to find your general revenue, recipients should add up all revenue streams covered as general revenue, which consists of those funds dedicated to sources which align with the census definition of general revenue of owned sources. So it is important to note here that general revenue in this case, at this moment, does not include funds received from water supply, electric power, gas supply, and public mass transit systems. Municipalities calculate lost revenue based on what could have been expected to occur if it were not for the pandemic. And we won't get into the specifics of this calculation in the briefing, but know that the Government Finance Officers Association, or GFOA, they have a useful calculator tool that can walk you through how to calculate your lost revenue under the interim final rule. Fiscal recovery funds used to replace lost revenue can be used quite flexibly, as the interim final rule gives recipients broad latitude to use funds to provide government services. And government services can include, but are not limited to, the maintenance of infrastructure or pay-go spending for building new infrastructure, including roads. You can also use it for modernization of cybersecurity, including hardware, software, and protection of critical infrastructure, health services, environmental remediation, school or educational services, and the provision of police, fire, and other public safety services. However, all ineligible uses still apply to this revenue. And so that means that revenue replacement funds cannot be used to pay interest or principal on outstanding debt, replenish rainy day funds or other reserve funds, pay settlements or judgments, deposit into pension accounts, or paying into non-federal match programs. The legislation specifically prohibited those uses. There is also an opportunity to use these funds for critical infrastructure needs, which I know is the major priority for many of you. Recipients may use funds to make necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. Infrastructure projects that do not fall under one of these categories may be funded by lost revenue replacement, but you should consult Treasury guidance or those frequently asked questions. The rules align the eligible projects with those allowed under Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds. So check those two federal programs. Also note that Davis-Bacon does not apply to projects funded solely by the Local Relief Fund, but it could apply if used in conjunction with other federal program funding that does require compliance with Davis-Bacon. You must also comply with any relevant state prevailing wage laws. Examples of eligible projects include lead service line replacement, improving stormwater systems, and modernization of cybersecurity. According to Treasury's interim final rule, municipalities can spend fiscal recovery funds on covering the cost of administering other fiscal recovery fund grants. Yes, you can use these funds for administrative purposes, and these costs should be categorized as their own project under the administrative cost expenditure category. We highly encourage you to use these funds to cover the cost of hiring a local grants manager if you don't already have one on staff. A number of local governments may also be able to pull funds together to hire one regional grants manager, for example, that works for multiple municipalities at once. A consultant can take the place of a hired grants manager in any of those cases, but NLC would still recommend hiring a staff member rather than paying for a consultant, so you build in that capacity to your municipality. Funds may also be used to cover the cost of wages for employees that spend time working on administering the city's local relief fund grant. As I briefly mentioned earlier, you do have time to plan accordingly for these funds, as these funds are meant to address the long-term economic and health consequences related to the pandemic. According to the interim final rule, all funds must be obligated by December 31st, 2024, and all funds must be fully spent by December 31st, 2026. While municipalities should try to obligate funds rather quickly, there is ample time to hire a grant manager or engage communities when planning on how to use these funds. Additionally, local recovery funds can be placed in interest-bearing accounts, and the interest accrued on the funds can be used by the city without any of the local recovery funds limitations. This is another reason why it's useful to seek out funds as soon as possible. When spending funds, it is critical that municipalities make sure you keep extensive documentation receipts outlining your procurement and compliance process, as their use of local recovery funds can be audited by Treasury down the line. In order to prepare for audits, municipalities should refer to the Uniform Administrative Requirements, Cost Principles, and Audit Requirements for federal awards. These regulations, I know, may seem quite complex, but NLC has put out some resources that can help guide your town in maintaining compliance and what you need to do to be in compliance. Treasury, I truly believe, will do likewise in the future. One should note that these uniform requirements mandate that grant recipients monitor the activities of subrecipients and contractors in order to ensure compliance with federal laws and grant terms and conditions. So note, you can't just not do reporting because you sub-allocate grants to someone. You yourself have to do that. Metropolitan cities must submit an interim report and quarterly project and expenditure report thereafter. The interim report for metropolitan cities will include recipients' expenditures by category at a summary level from the date of the award to June 31st, 2021 by August 31st, 2021. And the quarterly project and expenditure report will include information about project and programmatic details and subawards that exceed $50,000. The first report is due on October 31st, 2021, and subsequent reports are due 30 days after the end of each calendar quarter. Metropolitan cities with populations above 250 must also submit an annual recovery plan performance report, which will provide the public and Treasury with information on projects that are using funding. So everybody will see how you are using this funding. This report is due on August 31st, 2021, but only July 31st each year thereafter. NEUs only must submit annual project and expenditure reports. And the initial report is from the recipient of the award to September 30th, 2021, and it is due on October 31st, 2021. So this coming fall. Following annual reports are due on October 31st of each year. The annual project and expenditure report will include information about project and programmatic details and subawards that exceed $50,000. And the reporting portal for interim reports and recovery plans was launched on Monday, August 9th. According to Treasury, the link to access the reporting portal was sent to recipient points of contact based on the contact information provided during the initial funding process. If you are a recipient and you did not receive the email, but you should have, Treasury has advised recipients to contact them at slfrp@treasury.gov. Treasury has also released a user guide for the portal for recipient reporting, as well as an annual recovery plan template. Those are your guides. Both of these resources can be found at treasury.gov/SLFRP. The template for the interim report is contained within the reporting portal, and the user guide includes screenshots and instructions for completing those templates. We've gone over a lot of information today, but know that there are more resources available for you to reference that will help you navigate and digest everything with this program. Treasury hosts valuable webinars on the coronavirus local and state recovery fund program, and you can review those programs homepage at treasury.gov/SLFRP. Please know, and I highly encourage every city leader and everybody within the municipal government who is responsible or has anything to do with these funds to read the interim final rule. Read the final rule once it's released. Read the frequently asked documents and routinely go back to them as we anticipate Treasury to provide updates and respond to questions that they themselves are receiving. And those have been immensely helpful as we are also submitting questions that we are getting from our members to Treasury, and Treasury has been most responsive in updating those FAQs. They have also released a number of resources and additional guidance. Treasury has. Recipients, you should consult these before allocating funds. Again, read the interim final rule, read the FAQs, read the compliance information. And for questions about the program, you can also email slfrp@treasury.gov, and that will go directly to Treasury staffers. And you know that NLC will continue to monitor and analyze the updated guidance coming from Treasury to give you the most up-to-date information possible. But we encourage you to continue to correspond with Treasury. We will do the same, and we will routinely engage with the administration to provide feedback on the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery fund. We all want this program to be a success. We have filed comments to request additional flexibility to fully address the hardships that we are seeing and being made aware of. We have improved direction and clarity for cities with limited capacity, and Treasury has responded. And we have asked for reconsideration of certain rules and guidance that really appear to be out of step with congressional intent or the realities of municipalities on the ground. NLC also continues to publish blogs and resources on our website to help guide you through this process. And through these blogs, you can find more information and direction about supporting food access and jobs, early childhood, economic mobility, mental health, well-being, broadband efforts, emergency rental assistance, and local business. To access all of those resources, visit nlc.org/recovery. Our talented team of lobbyists and expert staff is available to NLC members to help get you the most out of these dollars coming through the American Rescue Plan Act. And so I want to make sure you utilize not just the local recovery fund, but the entire American Rescue Plan Act of $1.9 trillion. So now I want to give you the latest update on where we are with passing a historic infrastructure bill through Congress. On August 10th, the Senate passed a bipartisan infrastructure bill, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, a significant step toward $550 billion in new federal investments in America's infrastructure that cities and towns can benefit from. This bipartisan framework includes $1.2 trillion over 8 years, with $284 billion for transportation, $55 billion for water infrastructure, $65 billion for broadband infrastructure, and $73 billion for power infrastructure. It did not include clawbacks of ARPA funds. And our team put together a great blog, What the Senate Infrastructure Bill Means for Local Governments, giving a breakdown of all of the programs that matter to you in transportation, in water, broadband, bonds, and more. I encourage you to give that a read and share it with your respective teams. But today, I'd like to give you the highlight reel for the IIJA, or the infrastructure bill, in 3 specific areas. These are the infrastructure basics, right, for all municipalities. There is funding for programs to fix local pain points. And finally, the bonus grants with new funding that cities can take advantage of. But let's start with how this legislation gets cities funding for the basics. In transportation, the base of this bill is actually a 5-year, $110 billion reauthorization for transportation, which needed to happen before the end of September to keep road, bridge, and transit funding flowing to your metropolitan planning organizations and state highway divisions for projects. It includes a historic $66 billion in rail funding and $39 billion in transit funds, including $33.5 billion for urbanized area formula grants, $18 billion for the State of Good Repair Grants program to upgrade rail and bus systems, $4.58 billion for rural areas, and $3.16 billion for bus and facility formula grants, $2.34 billion for low or zero emission bus grants, and $1.94 billion for improving transit services for seniors and individuals with disabilities. There was a lot in there that you will recognize and you will see. And there was a lot in there for us to continue to fight for as we go through this process. As it relates to water and wastewater, there is $11.7 billion each for the clean water and drinking water state revolving funds, which go out through your states, and they're offering 49% principal forgiveness on the loans. For airports, there's a $15 billion bump in airport improvement grants for runways and terminal expansions. And the bill's programs also tackle pain points, including replacing lead pipes. There's $15 billion for lead pipe replacement through the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, again, with the 49% principal forgiveness on the loans. Notice, and I hope you're connecting the dots, you can utilize potential funding that's coming through this infrastructure bill and marry it with your infrastructure ideas for the local relief fund and leverage those two programs to maximize what you can do in your respective communities. For rebuilding bad bridges, there are 45,000 bridges in the US that are in poor condition, and there is now a new $20 billion investment in both large bridges in poor condition as well as bridges that are in rural and tribal areas. There's also a new culvert program for removal or replacement. For getting contaminants out of water, if you know what PFAS is, you'll be glad to hear there's $10 billion for dealing with emerging contaminants, including $4 billion for PFAS specifically. It's something we've long fought for. And for fixing rail crossing congestion in communities, there's $3 billion for the grade crossing elimination grant program that NLC championed with Senator Cantwell. For broadband gaps, there is $1 billion for enabling middle mile broadband competitive grant program for construction, improvement or acquisition of middle mile broadband infrastructure, and another $1.3 billion for the Digital Equity Act with state formula grants and competitive grants that local governments and nonprofits can access directly. These funds are being used for digital inclusion work, such as connecting residents in need of devices, subsidized broadband subscription, and skills training. Finally, there's $75 million in the Senate bill that will repair dams identified in the national inventory that need attention and avoid costly breaks and flooding. Now, this is the bonus round of grants, right? There is a lot of competitive funding in the bill, so get ready to dust off your plans. New with NLC support is $5 billion in national infrastructure project assistance grants, where communities are eligible to apply for funding to complete critical large projects that would otherwise be unachievable without assistance. There is a new $5 billion Safe Streets for All program that directly supports cities' Vision Zero plans and improvement to reduce crashes, fatalities, especially for cyclists and pedestrians. There is $2.5 billion in grant funding dedicated to installing EV charging in the bill that cities can compete for, and that's electric vehicles. In the big infrastructure competition category, there's $16 billion for major national infrastructure projects that will deliver substantial economic benefits in our respective communities. There's also an additional $7.5 billion in RAISE grants, which are the former Tiger Build grants, and $8 billion in infra grants to rebuild critical community transportation infrastructure projects. In the water and resiliency mix, there is close to $10 billion, including $8.3 billion for the Bureau of Reclamation Western Water Infrastructure, including for aging infrastructure, water storage, water recycling and reuse, water smart, and drought contingency plans, amongst other things. And that's extremely important given what we're seeing on the West Coast today. $500 million for loans and grants to local communities, raising rising water levels, coastal erosion, and flooding. There is $1 billion for the FEMA Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program, or BRIC program, which is a pre-disaster mitigation program that supports states, local communities, tribes, and territories that are undertaking hazard mitigation projects to reduce the risks they face from disasters and natural hazards. And finally, there's $1 billion for state and local cybersecurity grant program to develop and implement cybersecurity plans and address your imminent cybersecurity threats. The best part is that this isn't even all of the great programs that are in the infrastructure bill. So definitely check out that blog for more information. So what happens next? That's a lot of information I've just shared. The next best news is that the budget resolution following the infrastructure bill has the ability to add things that were not tackled in the original bill. And this is what we're going to be fighting for over the next coming weeks. NLC has been advocating for key areas like workforce to be included. And as of August 25th, we expect this to move soon. As the House returns to consider both the infrastructure package and budget resolution to fund the government, they're actually doing that this week. You can expect a high level of political messaging about what deserves to be in the budget when using a reconciliation process. Let's stay focused on what's important and let's tune out the political rhetoric. Let's stay focused on what's in the infrastructure bill, what's in this reconciliation package that will make it so that you can invest in your own local infrastructure priorities and get those infrastructure projects done. NLC will stay true to our policies, and we will continue to advocate for the goals we set as city leaders, and that's where our focus will be, I can assure you. Our legislative priorities for the reconciliation bill, which were fully outlined and addressed in a letter to the congressional leadership and to all members of Congress, those priorities include investments in skills training, which is what you told us is a priority. You've also said you need to see investments in local violence prevention programs, policies and fundings to address climate change, mitigation, and adaptation after the difficult last 2 years with natural disasters. You need to see a repeal of the cap on state and local taxes so you have the flexibility you need. And you need new federal investments in housing, a permanent legislative solution for DACA recipients, and you have also stressed the need to address childcare access and affordability. That's where our focus will be, and we will work to get it done with you. Thank you for taking the time to watch today's presentation. I know it was a lot of information, but there's a lot happening here in Washington, and that's a good thing. Please be sure to visit nlc.org, where you will be able to access our latest news and resources. And to help your city navigate ARPA funds and the upcoming infrastructure legislation and so much more, you can refer to our website. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at advocacy@nlc.org. We deliver, NLC delivers an incredible value to our members, saving you real dollars at home. So if you're not a member, join so that you can benefit from savings with our trusted private partners to access national peer networks, hands-on assistance, and community discounts. We encourage any municipality that is not a member of the National League of Cities to find out how to leverage our resources at nlc.org/state leagues. We look forward to working with you further, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.